The first thing Luther felt was cold, not the clean, sterile chill of cryosleep, but the invasive kind that crawled into bone and refused to leave. His cheeks scraped across metal as he was dragged forward, boots skidding uselessly. Someone ripped the navigator's insignia from his collar. The patch tore away with a sound that felt louder than it should have been. "Navigation fraud," one of the enforcers said flatly. Another laughed. "Cargo re-education should straighten him out." Luther didn't get a chance to respond. A fist drove into his back, forcing him through a pressure door. The hatch slammed shut behind him with a hydraulic hiss that echoed far too long. Darkness swallowed him. He lay there for a second, breathing slowly, counting it out, the way they taught you when panic wanted the wheel. For in, for hold. For out. The air smelled wrong. Old metal, stale disinfectant, and something else, musky, sharp, alive. Then he heard it. Breathing, not human. A low, vibrating sound rolled out of the shadows, steady and deliberate. A warning. Luther pushed himself up, muscles protesting. His eyes adjusted just as the emergency light flickered on, bathing the cargo hold in a sick yellow glow. They were watching him. Two figures crouched against the far wall, barely contained by the shadows, cat-like, tall, built for speed and violence. Their bodies were lean, powerful, unmistakably female even through the alien lines of muscle and fur. One was larger, darker, her obsidian pelt catching the light, like oil on water. The other was smaller, lighter, pressed half behind the first, like a ghost trying to hide inside another body. The larger one growled. It wasn't blind rage. It was controlled, measured. Her eyes never left him. "Easy," Luther said quietly, raising his hands. His voice sounded too loud in the cramped hold. "I'm not armed." That was only half true. His shock stick still hung at his belt. Protocol said he was supposed to use it. Establish dominance. Pain first, control second. Instead, he unclipped it and slid it across the floor. The metal clink echoed. The smaller alien flinched. The larger didn't move. Up close, Luther saw the wound. A dark, wet stain along the larger female's flank, matted fur hiding swelling that looked wrong. Her breathing hitched just enough to betray it. They weren't feral. They were prisoners. Luther reached into his pocket and pulled out his ration bar. He set it on the floor between them, then backed away until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. He sat down slowly, deliberately placing himself lower than them. "I don't know what they told you about me," he said, steady, calm, the way he'd spoken to trapped survivors and panicking crew before, "but I'm not your enemy." The larger female's ears twitched. Her gaze flicked to the ration, then back to his face. The smaller one's stomach growled. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ship screamed. Alarms detonated through the hull. Gravity lurched. The floor dropped away like a bad dream, and Luther was airborne, weightless and swearing as the ark shuddered around them. The aliens moved instantly. The larger one twisted midair, claws finding purchase on a wall seam. The smaller wasn't fast enough. She was flung across the hold, spinning. Out of control. Luther reacted without thinking. He caught her. The impact drove the breath from his lungs as they slammed together. He expected pain, claws, blood. Instead, she clutched his jacket with both hands and buried her face against his chest. She was shaking. Her heartbeat was frantic, uneven, wild. He could feel it through layers of fabric and fur. Slowly, Luther forced his own breathing to steady. In, hold, out. Her trembling eased. Just a fraction. Gravity snapped back on. They hit the deck hard. She scrambled away, wide-eyed, retreating toward the larger female, but she didn't look at Luther like prey anymore. She looked confused. The larger one stared at him now, not with raw aggression, but calculation, assessment. The growl in her chest softened into something lower, deeper. The ark groaned again, hull plates protesting as the storm outside tore at them. Luther sat up, chest aching, heart still pounding. He met the larger alien's gaze and spoke the truth, because lying felt pointless now. "I'm scared," he said. "But I won't hurt you." Something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. The lights flickered, and somewhere deep in the ship, something listened. The hold stayed silent after the alarms faded, as if the ship itself were holding its breath. Luther didn't move. He kept his back against the wall, legs bent, hands open and visible. Every instinct he had screamed to stand, to make himself look bigger, stronger. He ignored it. Redditors understood confidence, not posturing. Across the hold, the larger alien female slowly straightened from her crouch. She was taller than he'd realized. Long-limbed power coiled beneath smooth obsidian fur, her posture unmistakably dominant. Even injured, she carried herself like something that had never been prey. Her eyes locked on him, luminous and sharp, reading every micro-movement. The smaller one hovered behind her, half-hidden, clutching her own arms as if trying to keep herself from coming apart. The air between them felt charged, not just fear, something thicker, chemical, sweet and metallic. Pheromones, Luther realized. The regime's favorite trick. Strip dignity, heighten instinct. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his pocket again. The larger female's claws slid out with a faint metallic whisper. "I'm not drawing a weapon," Luther said quietly. I promise. He pulled out the ration bar and placed it on the floor, then did something that made his pulse spike harder than any alarm. He slid it toward them. Food was leverage on this ship. Offering it without demand was close to heresy. Then he retreated farther, until his shoulders pressed flat to the wall. He lowered his gaze, not in submission, but respect. Minutes passed. The smaller alien twitched first. Her nose lifted, scenting the ration, eyes darting between Luther and the food. Hunger warred openly with fear across her face. The larger female noticed. She shifted, placing herself slightly sideways, not blocking the food, but not fully allowing access either. A decision was being made. Finally, the larger one let out a low rumbling sound. Not a growl this time, a command. The smaller alien moved. She crossed the distance in a blur, snatched the ration bar, and retreated instantly, tearing it open with sharp teeth. She ate like someone who didn't trust the food to stay real. Luther didn't react. He kept breathing slow and even. The larger female watched him closely as the smaller one ate. Then her gaze dropped to her own side. The wound blood had soaked deeper into her fur. Infection clung to the air now, sharp and unmistakable. You're hurt, Luther said softly. Her ears flattened. A warning. He nodded once. I know you don't trust me. You shouldn't, but if that wound closes wrong, you'll be dead in days. He reached into his jacket again, slower this time, and pulled out his emergency kit. He set it on the floor and nudged it forward with his boot. Water antiseptic. A single bioadhesive bandage. The larger female stared at it, then at him. Your choice, Luther said. I won't touch you unless you allow it. The words hung between them. At last, she moved not toward the kit, toward him. Every muscle in Luther's body locked. She crossed the hold with silent steps, towering over him, her shadow swallowing his chest. He could smell her now. Heat iron, something wild and intoxicating beneath the fear. She crouched directly in front of him, slowly, deliberately. She lifted her wounded side, exposing the injury. Permission. Luther swallowed. Thank you. He moved carefully, every motion slow enough to be read. He cleaned the wound with shaking hands, the antiseptic making her hiss and tense. He didn't pull away when her breath brushed his neck, hot and sharp. She watched him the entire time, not with hatred, with focus. When he finished and sealed the bandage, she didn't move away immediately. She stayed close, her presence overwhelming in the confined space. Her eyes traced his face, his throat, his hands. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out and pressed 2 fingers against his chest, right over his heart. She tilted her head, listening. Luther froze. Thump, thump, thump. After a moment, she withdrew her hand and stepped back, issuing a soft, almost thoughtful sound deep in her chest. Something fragile had formed in the dark, not trust but recognition above them. The ship groaned again, deeper this time, like a warning carried through bone. And Luther had the unsettling feeling that, whatever storm was coming, it would not care who was human and who was alien. The storm didn't announce itself again. It arrived. The ark lurched sideways with brutal force, throwing Luther hard against the wall. Metal screamed. Somewhere above them, something structural failed with a sound too deep to be machinery. The lights dimmed, surged, then flickered erratically. The larger alien female moved instantly. She was on her feet in a heartbeat, positioning herself between Luther and the door. Wounded side angled away, uninjured shoulder forward. Pure instinct. Shielding. The smaller one darted closer to Luther, crouching low, eyes wide, ears flattened against her skull. Then gravity failed. The floor vanished. Luther felt his stomach rise into his throat as the hold rotated violently. Loose debris lifted and spun like shrapnel caught in slow motion. He kicked off the wall on instinct, reaching out blindly, and felt hands grab him. Strong clawed, certain. The larger female caught him midair. One arm locked around his torso, her grip iron tight despite her injury. Her body was hot against his, heat bleeding through fabric and fur. The scent of her filled his lungs, sharp and intoxicating. The smaller one latched onto his other side, clinging desperately for a suspended second. They were all tangled together, bodies pressed close as the universe lost its sense of direction. Gravity slammed back on. They hit the floor in a heap. Luther groaned, breath knocked out of him, his back pressed to solid muscle and warm fur. He realized he was lying partially against the larger female's chest, her arm still wrapped around him. Neither of them moved. Her breathing was fast, controlled. His was not. Slowly, she released him and pushed herself upright, grimacing as pain crossed her features. Luther rolled onto his side, heart hammering, painfully aware of how close they still were. The ship groaned again. This time, something gave. A seam along the cargo door sparked, metal warping outward. The locking mechanism shrieked, showering sparks across the deck. The smaller alien let out a sharp cry. No, Luther breathed. That door opens. The lower deck's vent. The larger female looked at the door, then at him. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. She moved to brace it, planting her feet and pressing her shoulder into the failing seal. It wasn't enough. Luther scrambled up beside her, planting his hands against the door as well. The metal vibrated violently under the combined strain of storm and pressure differential. Push with me, he said. She didn't need the words, their bodies pressed side by side, shoulders and hips aligned by necessity. Luther felt the strength in her frame, the way her muscles moved under fur, the raw power restrained only by injury and will. The smaller one joined them, pushing where she could, trembling but determined. Together, they held. The door screamed. The hull moaned. Then dashed slowly. The storm's pressure eased. The seam stopped widening. The sparks faded. Silence rushed in, thick and ringing. They stayed there for several seconds longer than necessary, none of them quite ready to move. Finally, the larger female stepped back. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard, eyes briefly closing as pain caught up to her. Luther reached for her without thinking, steadying her elbow. She stiffened at the contact, then she didn't pull away. He could feel her heat through his glove, feel the tension under her skin. She turned her head slightly, looking down at his hand on her arm. Her gaze lingered. Then she reached up and covered his hand with hers, not removing it, claiming it. A low, resonant sound vibrated in her chest. Not a growl, something deeper, intimate. The smaller alien watched them closely, curiosity overriding fear. She stepped closer and pressed her forehead briefly against Luther's side, seeking the familiar rhythm beneath his ribs. Thump, thump, thump. The ship responded. The walls hummed on alarm, not failure but something smoother, almost attentive. Luther felt it in his bones. This ship, he whispered, awed and unsettled. It's listening. The larger female met his gaze. For the first time, there was no hostility in her eyes, only fire, and a question neither of them were ready to answer. The hum didn't fade, it settled. Luther noticed it only after his pulse slowed, enough to hear anything beyond his own blood. The walls of the cargo hold vibrated at a low, steady frequency, not loud enough to alarm, but present enough to be felt through the soles of his boots. The ship was awake. The larger alien female straightened slowly, testing her weight. Her hand slid from Luther's, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary before falling away. She flexed her fingers once, as if grounding herself. The smaller one stayed close to Luther's side, pressing her shoulder lightly against his thigh, not hiding, anchoring. The lights flickered again, then stabilized into a dim blue glow that hadn't been there before. That's new, Luther murmured. He moved toward the door, careful not to startle either of them. The warped seam still smoked faintly, metal scorched and twisted. Beyond it, he could hear distant alarms, muffled by layers of hull and storm. The arc was bleeding. If this section vents, he said quietly, we won't even feel it. We'll just be gone. The larger female stepped up beside him, close enough that he could feel her body heat again. She followed his gaze to the door, then back to his face. Her eyes searched him, not for weakness but for truth. I won't lie, Luther continued. I don't know how to get us out, but I won't abandon you. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. She studied him for a long moment. Then she made a sound low, deliberate, and tapped her chest once. Then she pointed at the smaller one, then at him. Then, finally, she pressed her palm flat against the wall. The hum deepened. Luther sucked in a breath. You feel it too. She nodded once. The smaller alien shifted, ears twitching. She lifted her hands and placed them against Luther's ribs, directly over his heart, as if checking a vital sign. Her breathing adjusted to match his again. In, hold out. The hum responded, smoothing further, the vibration becoming almost warm. A chill ran down Luther's spine. This ship isn't just metal, he said. It's reacting to us too. This, he gestured vaguely between the three of them. The larger female moved closer, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Not fear this time, but awareness. He became acutely conscious of her size, her strength, the restrained power in every movement. Her sense shifted, less sharp, less alarmed, more focused. She leaned in, just slightly, her forehead nearly touching his. Her breath brushed his cheek, slow and deliberate. Luther held still, not trusting himself to move without breaking something fragile. The smaller one watched intently, head tilted, eyes flicking between their faces. She reached out and placed one hand on Luther's arm, the other on the larger female's hip, linking them. The hum surged. Lights along the floor panels flared softly, lines of pale blue tracing patterns Luther hadn't noticed before. The ship responded as if recognizing a command it hadn't heard in a long time. Okay, Luther whispered. That's definitely not normal. A sudden voice crackled through the overhead speaker, cutting through the moment like a blade. Cargo hold 17. The voice purred, cultured, amused. You're proving far more interesting than projected. Luther stiffened. The larger female snarled, the sound sharp and furious. I see fear, the voice continued. I see proximity, stress-induced bonding. Beautiful, really. The ship thrives on it. The lights dimmed. Enjoy your connection, the voice said. You'll need it. The channel cut. Silence returned, heavier now. Luther exhaled slowly. That was the man who put us here. The larger female's claws slid out, scoring the metal floor. The smaller one pressed closer to Luther, her body trembling not from fear alone, but from the lingering resonance still humming through the room. We're not experiments, Luther said firmly. And we're not cargo. He looked at both of them. If this ship responds to connection, Then we don't survive by fighting each other. We survive by choosing each other. The larger female held his gaze. After a moment, she reached out and rested her hand on his chest again. Firmer, this time possessive, protective. Her eyes burned with a promise. The storm outside roared louder, and somewhere deep within the ark, something ancient and listening began to turn toward them. They didn't go looking for the bridge. The ship led them. The cargo hold doors peeled open without a command. Metal sighing as if relieved, the corridor beyond pulsed with the same blue glow that had traced the floor earlier, thin veins of light threading through the walls like a nervous system waking up. Luther stepped out first. Senses sharp, every vibration speaking a language he was only beginning to hear. The larger female followed at his shoulder, close enough that their arms brushed with each step. The smaller one stayed just behind him, one hand lightly gripping the back of his jacket as if he were a tether. The alarms were gone. That terrified him more than noise ever could. Quiet means the ship's already made a decision, Luther murmured. The corridor sloped upward, gravity subtly adjusting as they climbed. Panels they passed brightened in response to their presence, then dimmed behind them, guiding, shepherding. This isn't evacuation routing, Luther said. It's invitation. The larger female tilted her head, listening. She placed her palm against the wall again. The hum deepened, answering her touch like a heartbeat recognizing a familiar rhythm. She looked at Luther, then pointed forward. They emerged into the bridge, or what the regime called the bridge. It wasn't steel and screens, it was alive. The chamber opened into a vast circular space, domed and dim, lit by soft bioluminescence that rippled across organic surfaces. Filament-like structures crawled along the walls, glowing gently, reacting to proximity and sound. Data didn't scroll here, it breathed. At the center stood the throne. Luther stopped short. It rose from the floor, like something grown rather than built. A seat formed of layered organic material and luminous filaments that pulsed with quiet power. Tendrils of light reached outward from it, embedding themselves into the deck, the walls, the ceiling. Luther swallowed. This isn't a chair. The smaller alien whimpered softly, awe and fear tangled together. The larger female went still, posture rigid, instinct screaming danger. Luther felt it too. The throne wasn't passive, it was waiting. He stepped closer. The filaments reacted instantly, brightening, curling toward him like curious fingers. A wave of sensation rolled through his chest, not painful, but intimate. Awareness without words, hunger without malice. You want a pilot, Luther said quietly, not a commander. He sat. The moment his body touched the throne, light surged, pain flared behind his eyes. Data slammed into his mind, gravitational shear, veil harmonics, whole stress vectors all at once, unfiltered. Luther gasped, fingers digging into the armrests as his muscles locked. No, too much, he choked. I can't. The throne pushed back. It demanded focus, singularity, control. Luther strained, jaw clenched, trying to impose order the way he'd been trained. The response was immediate and brutal. Feedback ripped through his nervous system, forcing a cry from his throat. The larger female moved without hesitation. She stepped behind him and pressed her hands to his shoulders, grounding him with sheer physical presence. Her body radiated heat, strength, solidity. The feedback eased slightly. Still not enough. She made a sharp sound over her shoulder. The smaller one scrambled forward, climbing carefully into Luther's lap, her movements deliberate, instinctively respectful of something sacred. She pressed her ear to his chest again, anchoring herself to his heartbeat. Thump, thump, the throne responded. The filaments softened their light, shifting frequency, adjusting. The larger female climbed onto the throne behind Luther, settling close, her legs bracketing him, her chest pressed firmly against his back. She wrapped one arm around his torso, the other resting over his heart. 3 heartbeats out of sync then. Slowly finding alignment, the pain vanished. In its place came clarity. Luther gasped as the ship opened to him, not as data, but as sensation. He felt the veil storm like pressure against skin. He felt weak points in the hull like old bruises aching before rain. He wasn't steering, he was listening, and the ship listened back. The lights across the bridge flared brilliant blue, the throne's filaments weaving around them, binding not flesh, but rhythm. The ark stabilized, its violent tremors smoothing into controlled motion. Luther laughed once, breathless and disbelieving. This thing never wanted one mind, he whispered. It wanted harmony. The larger female lowered her head, resting her forehead against his shoulder. The smaller one relaxed fully, trusting, breathing steady. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the ark found its voice, and for the first time since his condemnation, Luther felt something dangerous and exhilarating. Bloom in his chest. Hope. Time lost its edges inside the throne. Luther no longer knew how long they had been bonded. Seconds, minutes. Something stranger. The ship breathed around them, not with air, but with intention. Every vibration carried meaning now. Every shift in pressure spoke directly to nerve and instinct. He wasn't alone in his own body. The larger female's presence at his back was constant, grounding. Her arm remained wrapped around his chest, her hand splayed over his heart as if she were holding it in place. Her breathing brushed the side of his neck, warm and steady. He felt every subtle adjustment of her posture, every tightening and release of muscle as she responded to the ship's needs before his mind. Fully caught up, the smaller one stayed curled against him, light but unwavering, her ear pressed firmly to his sternum. Whenever his pulse spiked, her fingers tightened reflexively, pulling him back into rhythm. 3 nervous systems, 1 loop. The Ark surged forward, not fighting the Veilstorm but sliding into it. Luther felt the storm as texture now, not chaos but layered currents, each one resonating at a different frequency. Where human instruments would have screamed overload, his body simply leaned left. He murmured without realizing he was speaking aloud. The ship obeyed. The larger female made a low sound in her chest approval, maybe, and shifted her weight. The throne adjusted instantly, translating the movement into course correction. They weren't commanding. They were dancing. The realization hit Luther so hard it almost broke the connection. Regime had failed because it tried to dominate the Ark. The curator believed fear and control were strength. But this ship didn't respond to hierarchy, it responded to trust. A spike of turbulence slammed into them. The smaller alien gasped, her fingers digging into Luther's jacket as the storm howled through the hull. "I've got you," Luther whispered. Though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring, the larger female tightened her hold around him, chin dipping to his shoulder. Her voice brushed his ear, rough but steady. "Do not pull away." "I won't." He meant it. The ship surged again, shields flaring. Pain rippled through Luther's spine as feedback threatened to overload him. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself not to lock up. The larger female responded instantly. She pressed closer, her body heat bleeding into him, her grip firm but not restraining. Stay. The smaller one hummed a soft, wordless tone that matched the ship's core frequency. The sound vibrated through Luther's ribs, smoothing the sharp edges of pain. The feedback vanished. Instead, something else took its place. Awareness. Not just of the ship but of them. Luther became acutely conscious of how close they were, how their bodies fit together with an ease that had nothing to do with coincidence. The rise and fall of breath, the weight of hands, the steady press of contact that had shifted from necessity into something warmer, heavier. The larger female's arm slid slightly, not away, but more securely around him, possessive, protective. The throne pulsed brighter, the Ark stabilized fully, tearing free of the worst of the storm and slipping into a quieter pocket of distorted space. Outside the viewport, the violence dulled to distant light. Inside, silence settled. The connection slowly loosened, not breaking, but easing. Luther sagged back against the throne, exhausted. The filaments dimmed, retracting gently. His head fell forward, breath coming slow and heavy. For a moment, none of them moved. Then the larger female released him carefully and stepped off the throne, steadying herself with one hand against the console. She looked at Luther with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "You heard us," she said quietly. "The ship heard us." Luther nodded. "It always has. We just never listened the right way." The smaller alien climbed down last, lingering a second longer than necessary, her fingers brushing Luther's chest one final time before she stepped away. Outside the bridge, systems hummed smoothly. The Ark held its course, alive and aware. Inside Luther, something had shifted just as permanently. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were bonded, and the universe would not let them forget it. The Ark did not slow, it listened. Luther stood at the edge of the throne now, hands hovering just above the living surface without touching it. He had learned something important during the bond. Forcing contact made the ship recoil. Intent without pressure worked better. The larger female stood at his right, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm whenever the deck subtly shifted. She watched the space ahead with a warrior's focus, ears angled toward sounds only she seemed to notice. The smaller one sat cross-legged near the base of the throne, fingertips resting against the deck, eyes half closed as if listening inward. They had become roles without deciding to: pilot, shield, sensor. "The storm isn't behind us," Luther said quietly. "It's folding around the Ark, like water around a stone." The smaller one nodded faintly. "Currents," she whispered. "They pull." They remember. That made Luther's stomach tighten. Remember what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pressed her palm to the floor. A soft harmonic tone vibrated up through the deck, rising into Luther's bones. The view beyond the forward viewport shifted. Space twisted not violently but subtly. Stars bent, stretching into pale arcs like reflections in disturbed water. Luther felt pressure behind his eyes, not pain, but weight. This ship has been here before, he realized. The storm isn't random. It has patterns, scars. The larger female growled softly, "Like battlefields." "Yes," Luther said. "Exactly like that." He closed his eyes, not because he was afraid, but because sight was suddenly the least useful sense he had. He focused inward instead, on the lingering echo of the bond, on the memory of synchronized breathing, on the warmth at his back and the steady pulse against his chest. The Ark responded. Data arose around him not as numbers, but sensations. Gravity tugged gently left. A sharp edge of distortion brushed the hull to the right. Ahead, something dense and dangerous pulsed. Like a bruise, inspaciative, Luther leaned with him. The maneuver should have torn the ship apart. Instead, the hull sung a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the bridge. The smaller one gasped, not in fear, in wonder. "It likes this," she said. "It likes being guided, not driven." The larger female stepped closer to Luther, placing her hand on his lower back. The contact was firm, steadying, not intimate in intention but intimate in effect. His awareness sharpened instantly. "Trust the pull," she murmured, "but do not surrender to it." Luther nodded. He adjusted course again, not fighting the current, but slipping sideways through it, using the storm's own momentum. The ark surged forward. Outside, the veilstorm parted, not opening cleanly, but bending just enough to allow passage. Energy ribbons scraped harmlessly along the shields, sparks dancing instead of detonating. The ship was no longer fleeing, it was threading the needle. Warning lights flashed briefly, then dimmed as systems recalibrated. Hull stress dropped. Power stabilized. Luther exhaled slowly, sweat cooling on his skin. "We're not out yet," he said, "but we're moving." The larger female's hand remained on his back. He could feel the strength there, the promise that if he faltered, she would hold. The smaller one rose and came closer, standing on her toes to peer at the viewport. She glanced back at Luther, eyes bright. "You hear it now," she said softly, "the quiet between dangers." He smiled despite the tension. "Yeah, I hear it." The ark glided forward, deeper into distorted space, but no longer blind. They were navigating by feeling now, and for the first time since the storm began. The universe seemed to yield. That broke through the outer veil without celebration. No alarms, no triumphant fanfare. Just quiet. The ark slid into a pocket of calm space where the stars held steady, sharp and distant, like they were observing rather than attacking. The violent pull of the storm faded into a low background pressure, present but no longer crushing. Luther didn't realize how tense he'd been, until his knees threatened to give out. He caught himself on the edge of the throne, breathing hard. The living surface dimmed beneath his palms, warm instead of demanding. Behind him, the larger female exhaled slowly. The sound was deep, controlled, but it carried exhaustion. She stepped closer, close enough that her hip brushed his thigh, and stayed there. The smaller one sank to the floor, legs folding beneath her. She pressed both palms to the deck, eyes closed, listening. The ark, HUMMED. Not urgently, contentedly. "That's it," Luther murmured. "That's the sound it makes when it isn't being hurt." He moved to the nearest console, a console then a semi-organic interface blooming with soft light. Data flowed now, readable without strain. Log entries scrolled into focus. His breath caught. "These aren't just system logs," he said slowly. "They're responses." The ark wasn't a machine in the traditional sense. It was biosynthetic, semi-sentient, grown as much as built, designed to resonate. The regime hadn't failed because of bad engineering. They failed because they misunderstood what strength meant. "They tried to dominate you," Luther whispered to the ship. "Didn't they?" The hum deepened slightly. "Yes," the smaller one said without opening her eyes. "They were loud, sharp, they broke the quiet places." The larger female frowned, stepping closer to read over Luther's shoulder, her brow furrowed as she absorbed the information, jaw tightening. "They called us cargo," she said, "but we were the missing component." Luther nodded. "Not just you, all of us. The ship doesn't respond to fear or rank, it responds to connection, to emotional coherence." He looked at them, really looked. At the way the smaller one listened with her whole body, at the way the larger one stood between Luther and the viewport without realizing she was doing it. "You weren't meant to be locked away," he said quietly. "You were meant to fly this Krista." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy with realization. Then the COM panel chirped a sharp, insistent tone. The larger female stiffened instantly, ears flattening. The smaller one's eyes flew open. Luther tapped the panel. A waveform bloomed across the display complex, layered, unfamiliar. The larger female sucked in a breath. "My people," she said. "That's a clan signal." The smaller one rose in a rush of movement, eyes shining. "They're alive." "Yes," the larger female replied. "They're searching." Coordinates flashed onto the screen. A clear route, a way home. The bridge felt suddenly smaller. Luther stared at the data, heart sinking even as relief flared. "They can extract you," he said. "Get you out before the storm closes again." The larger female didn't answer. She stared at the coordinates for a long moment, at the promise of safety, of familiarity, of blood ties and shared history. The smaller one stepped closer to the screen, trembling with hope. Then the larger female reached out and erased the data to signal cut. What Luther started. She turned to him, eyes fierce, voice steady. "Home is not a place that leaves others to die." She gestured to the ark, to the fragile calm holding around them, to the hundreds of lives still depending on this ship to survive the storm. "I will not trade one cage for another," she said. The smaller one hesitated, then nodded, stepping to the larger female's side and pressing her forehead briefly against her arm. "Family," Luther swallowed hard. "You don't owe us that." "No," The larger female agreed. I choose it. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body again, steady and real. Her gaze held his, searching. We stay, she said. Together. The Ark hummed in agreement. Outside, the storm shifted restless, watching. Inside the bridge, 3 lives aligned around a single truth. They weren't just surviving the universe, they were redefining how to move through it. The calm didn't last, it never did. The Ark shuddered not violently, but with intent, like a living thing bracing itself. The stars beyond the viewport warped again, their steady pinpoints stretching into thin, trembling lines. Luther felt it immediately, a pressure behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest. The storm's shifting, he said. It's noticed we're not running. The larger female sable moved to the viewport, posture rigid, eyes scanning the distortion. Junior hovered near Luther, fingers brushing his sleeve as if checking that he was still there. We can hold this pocket, Luther continued, but not forever. The Ark needs direction, a decision. As if summoned by the word, the COM panel flared to life again. This time, the signal was clean, clear, and powerful. Sable's breath caught a holographic projection bloomed in the center of the bridge. A tall, armored figure with silver-marked fur and eyes like polished amber. Authority radiated from her even through flickering light. Sable, the figure said. Her voice was calm, controlled, carrying the weight of command. This is Matriarch Selene of the Talon. You are alive. Sable stepped forward instinctively. Matriarch. Junior's eyes went wide. She pressed closer to Luther without realizing it. We have breached the outer veil. Selene continued. Your signal was unusual, but unmistakable. We can extract you, both of you. She paused, gaze shifting, assessing as if finally noticing Luther. The human is not part of this offer. Luther felt the words land like a physical blow. Sable, Selene said gently, your duty is to your blood. The storm will consume this Ark. Come home. Silence stretched. Sable didn't answer immediately. Luther didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He understood this moment wasn't his to claim. Junior looked between them, confusion and fear warring across her features. Finally, Sable spoke. You taught me to be a shield, she said, to stand between danger and those who cannot endure it. Yes, Selene replied, and you failed once. I do not blame you for surviving. Sable's jaw tightened. This ship is full of those who cannot endure the storm alone, Sable said. They are wounded, afraid, abandoned. That is not our burden, Selene said firmly. We are not caretakers of the galaxy. Sable turned slightly, glancing back at Luther. At Junior. At the living Ark, humming softly beneath their feet. It is mine, she said. The words echoed. Selene's expression hardened. Think carefully. Once you refuse, the Talon will not return. Sable stepped forward one final pace. Her voice didn't waver. Then do not return. The projection flickered. For a long moment, Selene said nothing. Then she inclined her head just barely. You choose exile, the matriarch said. I choose family, Sable replied. The signal cut. The bridge felt suddenly warmer. Junior let out a breath. She'd been holding and pressed her forehead briefly against Sable's side. Sable rested her hand there, steady and sure. Luther swallowed. You didn't have to do that. Sable turned to him, eyes fierce but calm. Yes, she said. I did. She stepped closer, stopping just inside his personal space, close enough that he could feel the gravity of her presence again, the quiet strength that had become familiar. You hear the ship, she said. You feel it. You belong here as much as we do. The Ark hummed louder, deeper, as if affirming the claim. Outside, the storm rolled and shifted, gathering itself. Inside, the choice had been made. There would be no rescue, only what they built together. The Ark moved, not abruptly, not violently. It chose a direction. Luther felt it before he saw it. A subtle shift in the deck beneath his boots. A tightening, then release, like a living thing stretching after long confinement. The stars outside the viewport rearranged themselves, not dragged or forced, but gently persuaded aside. We're committing, Luther said quietly. Sable stood beside him, her stance relaxed but ready, one hand resting against the curved edge of the throne as if reminding the ship she was still there. Junior hovered close, fingers brushing Luther's sleeve, eyes fixed on the stars with open wonder. The Ark slipped fully into motion, threading the storm's remaining turbulence with practiced grace. Hull stress indicators stabilized, power levels equalized. The violent violet glare of the veil softened into distant ribbons of light. For the first time since Luther had been dragged from cryo, there were no alarms, no threats, just movement. He let out a slow breath and leaned back against the living console, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His hands trembled faintly. He hadn't realized how much of himself he'd poured into keeping them alive. Sable noticed. She stepped closer without a word and placed her hand on his forearm, steady and warm. The contact wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It grounded him instantly. You did not break, she said softly. Luther huffed a tired laugh. I definitely bent. She tilted her head, studying him. Bending is not weakness. It is how you stay standing. Junior nodded vigorously, then pressed her ear against Luther's chest one last time. listening. Satisfied, she smiled, a small, almost shy expression that felt like a miracle given where they'd started. The Ark hummed, a low, content sound that vibrated through bone and metal alike. Luther straightened and looked out at the stars. "We can't go back," he said. "Not to the regime. Not to the old routes. They'll hunt this ship." "Let them," Sable replied. "They do not understand what they are chasing." He glanced at her. "And where do we go?" Sable looked to the stars, then back to him. Her eyes held no fear now, only resolved. "Somewhere uncharted," she said. "Somewhere no one has tried to own." Junior raised her hand and pointed not at a mapped system, but at a dark patch between constellations. Empty space. Possibility. Luther followed her gesture. The navigation interface responded instantly, blooming with gentle light instead of warnings. The Ark accepted the suggestion without resistance. He smiled, slow and genuine. "An unknown horizon," he murmured. Sable stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his again. Not accidental, not urgent, just present. The kind of closeness earned through shared fear and survival rather than promises. "You are not cargo," she said. "Not to us." Luther met her gaze. "Neither are you." For a moment, the universe seemed to pause. Watching then, the Ark surged forward, leaving the storm behind entirely. Stars stretched into clean lines of light as the ship leaped into open space, free and unclaimed. Behind them lay cages, cruelty, and control. Ahead nothing certain, only trust, only connection, only the quiet, revolutionary truth humming through a living ship and three aligned hearts. They were no longer running, they were choosing.